In just one single year, the number of Des Moines public school families living in their cars has actually tripled.
Yeah.
And I really want to let that specific reality settle for a moment, because right now, there are over 550 students in that district alone experiencing homelessness.
It's a massive number.
It is. And, the immediate educational impact of that isn't just a slight dip in grades. These kids are like 80% more likely to drop out entirely. They're 5 times more likely to be placed in special education, and over half of them are chronically absent.
Right. Because, it creates a foundational collapse.
Yeah.
Expecting a child who literally doesn't know where they're parking to sleep tonight to, focus on algebra or reading comprehension the next morning, it just defies basic human psychology.
Exactly.
You're asking them to perform these high-level cognitive tasks while their brain is just stuck in pure survival mode.
Which brings us to exactly what we're doing today. So, welcome to the deep dive.
Glad to be here.
We are exploring the reality of what homelessness actually looks like in Iowa to build the perfectly homeless state score for the state.
Yeah.
And we're going to examine, housing, enforcement, local services, and what it actually takes to survive day to day. We won't reveal the final score until the very end, but we are going to build it layer by layer as we explore the facts on the ground.
Because we want to understand the friction points, right?
Yeah, exactly.
How do state policies, city ordinances, and these daily realities intersect for the people who are actually living through them?
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's look at the scale of the issue first. Looking at the 2025 point-in-time data for Polk County, they identified 779 people experiencing homelessness, which is a 9% increase from the previous year. And the unsheltered numbers, meaning people physically living outside or in cars, hit a record high of 206.
And you really have to look closely at who makes up that number to dispel a very persistent myth.
Right, the out-of-state myth.
Exactly. A common narrative you hear all the time is that homelessness is driven by transient populations, people crossing state lines looking for better services or warmer weather.
Yeah.
But the Polk County data shows the exact opposite. This is an intensely localized crisis. About 78% of the unsheltered population list Polk County as their last permanent address.
Wow, 78%.
Yeah. And another 18% came from another county, right there in Iowa. Only 4% came from out of state.
Meaning these are locals. These are people who were housed in the community, working in the community, and just fell out of the system.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And there are severe racial disparities embedded in that local fallout, too. Black residents make up 24% of the homeless population in the county, despite representing only 8.9% of the general population.
So if 78% of these folks are locals who used to have an address, what exactly happened to their housing?
Right.
The obvious bottleneck is affordability.
Oh, it's a massive structural bottleneck. Consider the primary healthcare, or PHC, wait list for housing programs in the central area.
Okay.
It consistently has over 750 people on it.
750 people waiting for housing.
Yep. But out of those 750 people desperately waiting for a unit, only about 15% are ever actually referred to an active housing program.
Wait, 15%?
Just 15%.
If the referral rate is that low, the system isn't just backlogged, it's structurally broken. It's like a high-stakes game of musical chairs where 85% of the players know right from the start that the music will stop and they won't get a seat.
That is a very accurate way to visualize it.
Or like trying to drain a flooded basement while someone's running a fire hose through the window.
Yeah.
The local charities are down there bailing water with buckets, but the housing market is the hose.
Yeah, exactly. When affordable units are virtually non-existent, permanent housing just becomes a locked door. You cannot effectively treat substance use or, manage a mental health crisis or hold down a consistent job if you don't have a secure place to sleep. The system essentially blocks the foundational step required for literally any other type of social rehabilitation to work.
So if permanent housing is a locked door for 85% of the people on that wait list, they don't just disappear.
No, they don't.
They have to sleep somewhere tonight. And that logically pushes us to look at emergency shelter access. Like, what happens when people fall back on that primary safety net?
Well, the net overflows.
Yeah.
The regional shelter system in central Iowa operates at virtually 100% capacity year-round. Central Iowa Shelter and Services, or CISS, is a prime example of this dynamic.
Okay, what do their numbers look like?
So they operate 150 permanent emergency beds. But on any given night, they routinely have to shelter up to 190 people.
Wait, how does a building with 150 beds sleep 190 people?
By utilizing any available square footage.
Seriously?
Yeah, overflow rooms, chairs, temporary cots. But even with those extreme measures,
Hmm.
a building has a physical fire code limit.
Right.
When the primary safety net is overcapacity, individuals have absolutely no choice but to exist in public spaces. This significantly weakens the overall picture of the state because they're physically forced to sleep in parks, under bridges, or in their vehicles.
Okay, let's pause right here. We've established that the foundational housing wait list is nearly impossible to clear, and the emergency shelters are spilling over their physical limits.
Yeah.
So, based on those two realities, I'm going to present a draft score for Iowa.
Keep in mind this is preliminary.
Absolutely, yeah. This draft score will likely fluctuate between A and F as we evaluate the rest of the state's policies. But based solely on this immediate infrastructure deficit, I'm announcing a draft score of a D.
Mm-hmm.
It is incredibly difficult to build a functioning support system when the foundation is already over capacity.
Right. Which brings us to the inevitable consequence of that overflow. When people are forced into public spaces, cities write laws to manage them.
Right. And here's where I want to play devil's advocate for a second, because the enforcement side of this is really complicated. How does Iowa respond to people surviving in public?
Well, we have to look at the municipal policy first. In September 2024, Des Moines passed a camping ban, Ordinance 16,382.
Okay.
It made sleeping on public property, which includes sleeping inside a parked car, a simple misdemeanor carrying a $15 fine.
Wow.
It also shortened the notice given to clear an encampment from 10 days down to just 3.
Wait, help me understand the logic there. If someone is living in a tent specifically because they cannot afford rent, what is a $15 fine supposed to accomplish? Like,
Yeah.
is it meant as an actual financial deterrent, or is it just a bureaucratic tool to establish a legal reason to force them to move? Are they just putting it on a tab?
It functions primarily as an enforcement mechanism. Originally, that ordinance contained an affirmative defense.
What does that mean?
This meant if you were cited by a police officer, you couldn't actually be penalized if you could prove the shelters were full, or if you were physically unable to pay the fine.
Oh, okay. So it acknowledged the overflow.
It did. It acknowledged the reality of the shelter deficit we just discussed. But in October 2025, the City Council voted 5-2 to amend the ordinance and remove that affirmative defense entirely.
So wait, even if the shelter literally turns you away because there are 190 people, you can still be ticketed for sleeping outside.
Yes, the legal protection recognizing the shelter deficit was completely removed.
That's wild.
And this wasn't just a local debate either. There was a highly organized push at the state level as well. House Study Bill 286 and Senate Study Bill 1195 were introduced, backed by the Cicero Institute, which is a national think tank.
Right.
And these bills attempted to implement a strict statewide ban on public camping, with the stated goal of moving unhoused individuals into designated government-run sanctioned camps.
And there was a wildly controversial penalty aimed at the actual charity workers in those bills, right? I remember seeing that.
There was, yeah. The proposed law would have made it an aggravated misdemeanor carrying potential jail time for homeless service providers if they failed to keep their designated service zones completely drug-free.
That is genuinely hard to wrap my head around. That's like arresting a doctor because a patient ate a cheeseburger in the waiting room.
Exactly.
Like, how can you hold a nonprofit volunteer criminally liable for the addiction of a person walking in off the street?
Well, that specific clause became a massive flashpoint. And it is crucial we look at the arguments from both sides neutrally here, because this really dominated the political landscape in Iowa.
Great. Let's look at both sides.
So proponents of these bans, generally representing the right-wing perspective championed by officials like Councilmember Coleman, they argued this is fundamentally an issue of public safety and order.
Oh.
They pointed to very real, documented concerns. There was a shooting at a local homeless encampment and an incident where a firearm was found near an elementary school.
Which is terrifying for parents.
Absolutely. Their core argument is that every citizen, housed or unhoused, must abide by basic civility rules. They believe strict enforcement is the necessary friction to push people to engage with social workers instead of refusing help.
And on the flip side, what were the anti-ban arguments?
The left-wing and anti-ban advocates, including the ACLU and dozens of public commenters, they argued that you simply cannot arrest your way out of a housing shortage.
Right.
They presented research showing it actually costs taxpayers exponentially more in jail and court fees to incarcerate someone for trespassing than it does to simply provide supportive housing.
That makes sense.
And they also highlighted severe mechanical flaws in the state bill. For example, forcing domestic violence shelters to post public signs declaring themselves drug-free homeless service zones.
Oh, because that would destroy their confidentiality.
Exactly. It would potentially endanger victims actively hiding from their abusers by broadcasting their location.
Wow. Well, it's worth mentioning for you listening that the statewide bill ultimately failed due to that massive public backlash from housing advocates and local municipalities who didn't want the state overriding their local control.
Right.
But the Des Moines city ban remains active.
Yeah.
And that creates an administrative paradox. Like if you're sitting in your living room listening to this, imagine your local government tells you that you cannot legally exist in space A, but space B is entirely full. You're asking people to solve a mathematical impossibility.
Exactly. When you can't sleep on the sidewalk without risking a fine,
Yeah.
and you can't get into a shelter, you retreat into your vehicle.
Which brings us full circle right back to the hook of this deep dive, those 550 Des Moines public school students living in cars. So if people are being pushed into vehicles, how friendly is the regulatory environment for vehicle dwelling?
It is a fragmented, highly complex maze of municipal codes. Living in a vehicle is heavily restricted, and the rules change depending on exactly where your tires are parked.
Okay.
For instance, the city of Ames has a zoning ordinance explicitly banning living in RVs or campers on both public and private land.
Even on private land?
Yep. Cedar Rapids restricts any vehicle over 20 feet long or 84 inches wide from parking for more than 60 minutes on a street during the day. Iowa City and Council Bluffs actively enforce strict 24 to 48-hour parking limits.
Wait, why specifically 84 inches wide? That seems like such an arbitrary number to put in a city code.
Oh, it is entirely intentional. What's fascinating here is that 84 inches is the standard width threshold for most large passenger vans, camper vans, and RVs. By banning vehicles over that width, the city effectively outlaws people living in mobile shelters without explicitly writing "no unhoused people" into the municipal code. It is a targeted dimensional limit.
That is fascinating and deeply bureaucratic. So if you're living in a car with your kids, you can't just park and rest. You are constantly moving.
Advocates call this the geography of evasiveness. The intense cognitive load placed on someone living in a vehicle is just staggering. You aren't just trying to sleep, you are constantly strategizing to avoid detection, police welfare checks, or getting towed.
And the sources outlined the micro-survival strategies people are forced to use. It's not just finding a dark street.
No.
They use crowdsourced apps like iOverlander to flag safe zones. They park in the semi-truck lots at Quick Star gas stations. Or they purposely mimic commercial traffic, like parking near 24-hour retail stores. So a standard passenger car just blends in with the overnight employee vehicles.
Think about the psychological toll of that.
Oh.
Imagine being a parent, trying to ensure your kids are rested for school, but you have to set an alarm for 3 a.m. to move your car across town to a different industrial lot because a police cruiser drove by too slowly.
Yeah.
It is an exhausting survival loop.
And trying to navigate that hostile regulatory maze while keeping a job just feels impossible. This is where the local community organizations step into the massive gap left by the state. So let's look at the outreach and social services.
This undeniably becomes one of the state's strongest operational categories.
Huh.
The level of mutual aid on the ground in Iowa is incredibly robust.
Yeah, the sources highlighted some great stuff.
Take an organization like Joppa in Des Moines. They operate heat teams during the brutal Midwestern winters, literally physically delivering winter fuel and insulated survival gear directly to people hidden in cars and tents. But crucially, they also offer USPS mail delivery.
That mail delivery detail is arguably the most vital thing we've discussed.
Absolutely.
If you don't have a mailing address, you cannot get a driver's license. You cannot open a bank account. You cannot pass a background check for an apartment, and you certainly can't apply for a formal job. By acting as a proxy address, Joppa is literally keeping people connected to the grid of society.
It is systemic life support. And we see similar innovation across the state. In western Iowa, the Siouxland Community Health Center operates a custom-built mobile hygiene vehicle featuring 3 private hot showers.
That's amazing.
In Johnson County, Shelter House and the University of Iowa Mobile Clinic have medical students and volunteers walking street corners on Saturday mornings, directly delivering medical care, food, and warm clothing.
It's essentially decentralized healthcare.
Exactly. And down in Council Bluffs, the police department actually created the Homeless Outreach Program, or HOP. They intentionally pair officers with first responder community health coaches.
Oh, that's smart.
Yeah, the goal is to connect people with resources rather than just citing them and moving them along.
These services help offset the massive infrastructure challenges we saw earlier. I mean, a hot shower before a job interview or a reliable mailing address is often the literal mechanism that prevents someone from falling entirely out of the workforce.
Mm.
They're keeping people alive, but outreach is triage. It stops the bleeding.
Yeah.
What are the actual pathways to permanent housing?
Well, there are some innovative concepts finally gaining traction. JAPA, again, has been working with the city of Des Moines to lease land and build Iowa's first tiny home village.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah, it's modeled specifically to provide permanent supportive housing for chronically homeless individuals. Additionally, Des Moines recently implemented a $50,000 housing problem-solving fund to help people cover utility deposits and rapid rehousing costs.
I mean, a tiny home village is a great headline. But let's look at the math on that $50,000 rapid rehousing fund. If you spread 50K across the hundreds of people caught in that initial bottleneck we talked about, that's what, a few $100 a person?
Yeah.
That won't even cover half of a standard security deposit, let alone first and last month's rent.
Your math is exactly right. These are fantastic, well-intentioned initiatives, but they are drastically underfunded compared to the scale of the crisis. A tiny home village will absolutely change the lives of a few dozen people, but it doesn't immediately solve the mathematical impossibility of a 750-person waitlist.
All right, we have pulled apart the data, the laws, and the daily reality. It is time for our final assessment. Let's summarize where Iowa stands. The major strengths clearly lie in the state's incredibly robust, highly motivated nonprofit outreach network.
Absolutely.
And the fact that the Cicero-backed statewide criminalization bill failed also prevents the enforcement landscape from becoming exponentially more punitive.
But the major weaknesses are severe. There's a critical lack of emergency shelter space. The permanent housing waitlists are functionally stalled, and local municipalities are utilizing targeted ordinances, like the 84-inch vehicle width rule and the removal of the affirmative defense in Des Moines, to enforce a constant stressful geography of evasiveness.
Let's assign the final grades for the scorecard. For housing affordability, we're looking at an F. When 85% of people on a waitlist are never referred to a unit, the system is failing its primary objective.
I agree completely. For shelter access, it earns a D. The system routinely operates beyond its physical capacity, forcing people out onto the street.
For criminalization and enforcement, we're giving a D-. Des Moines removed its affirmative defense, heavily penalizing unhoused people who have no legal alternative, even though the broader statewide ban failed.
For vehicle dwelling friendliness, a D. The fragmented maze of strict time limits and highly specific size restrictions places a massive cognitive load on vehicle residents.
But looking at outreach and social services, we give that an A-. The mobile hygiene units, the proxy mail delivery, and the mutual aid programs are brilliant boots-on-the-ground solutions.
And finally, Pathways to Permanent Housing receives a C-. The tiny homes and deposit funds are innovative steps forward, but they remain drastically under-resourced against the actual need.
So, combining all of that data, it is time for the reveal. The final perfectly homeless state score for Iowa is a D+.
And that score reflects the reality on the ground. The state avoids a failing grade solely because the tireless, highly organized work of local nonprofits and outreach teams is acting as a massive buffer.
Right.
They are single-handedly offsetting the severe policy and infrastructure deficits that exist at the municipal and state levels.
Which leaves us with a rather precarious foundation.
It does. And it raises a critical question for you to consider long after this is over. If local charities, proxy mail services, and weekend volunteers are the only safety net keeping this entire system from total collapse, what happens to Iowa's unhoused population if those private funds dry up, or if those volunteers simply burn out?
That's the perfectly homeless state score for Iowa. If you found this information useful, please hit like and subscribe the channel, and don't forget to hit the notification bell so we can annoy the crap out of you with the next 27 state posts. But don't worry, Lay, you're going to find it very interesting to learn which state ranks the best and worst. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next episode.
This is a 50-state journey through how America actually treats people without housing, and every state tells a different story. If you'd like to support the project, visit the Perfectly Homeless Etsy store and pick up a PH hoodie. Every purchase helps fund future episodes and keeps these stories in front of the public. Wear the logo. Start a conversation. Because homelessness isn't someone else's problem anymore. It's happening in every state, every city, and more neighborhoods than most people realize. Until next time, stay safe, Stay informed, and we'll see you in the next state.